All right, all right. Good to have everybody here tonight. And this is going to be a special treat for you. Uh, this man beside me is not Elijah. He's actually a guy out in Idaho. And I can play around with him because I've known him 20 years. This is Brett Rademacher. And Brett and I met each other many, many years ago. He was in his Joseph pit, and he that's a whole nother story. We won't get in. I don't know if he's going to get into it or not, but Brett is very skilled in online marketing and systems, and but God put something on his heart many years ago, but has just now felt the Lord say, "This the time is now to begin this," and it's called the Shofar Global Network, and that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. So I have muted most of you. If you're not muted, go ahead and mute yourself so that we don't have any background noise. And if you have questions along the way, please put those in the chat area. And okay, so okay, I just want to make sure everybody's hearing me. Sometimes I go along and everybody's saying, "Hey, I don't hear a word you're saying."
Yeah.
So I don't think we got that problem.
Yeah.
Right. So Brett is actually has six children and loves rugby and lives in Idaho and has been involved in the direct uh, sales business and online programs and so forth. And I could give you a whole list of things he's done. But tonight we're just going to talk about something that's on his heart. And Brett actually re-engaged with me after I had flown out to Las Vegas when he was going through a difficult time 20 years ago, and helped him understand that he had a Joseph calling on his life. And so we've stayed in touch over the years, but we had lost touch until I had heart surgery almost a year ago now. Hard to believe it's been that long. But we reconnected and turned out that he was going to be able to help us with the problem we were having with our TGIF devotional, that Google had changed the rules and everything. And so Brett knew how to help us. And so I'm grateful that he was able to help us with that as well. And hopefully all of you are getting the devotional now. So, Brett, good to have you. And I'm looking forward to what you're going to share with us tonight and how we're all going to change the world together.
All right. So the first thing I want to say is if you ever meet Oz, and the first thing he starts to tell you is that you're going through a Joseph Pitt experience, run. I think my response was something like ugh. First of all, I just want to thank everybody for being on here. I've got a challenging task, and that's to tell a very abridged story in over a 28-year period and do it in less than an hour. Okay, so I'm going to go fairly rapid. Oz, if you need to say anything in between, just interject because I'm going to steamroll this thing. And then hopefully, after you're done getting fire hosed and you're still around, I do have a lot more comprehensive information available. So I'm just going to really focus on the Cliff Note highlight version, and then that'll help. What I'm really trying to do is paint a big picture and not get into the micro details. And I have all the information available for micro details. So I'm going to give you just a quick highlight of my starting point. I'm 61. I'm married. I have 8 kids. I became a Christian when I was 20 and got saved. And then a few weeks later, they asked if you'd want to come up and get filled with the Holy Spirit. And I raised my hand and went up. And that was kind of the beginning of this journey that started with this idea that I was reading my Bible and I was seeing that God spoke to people. And I was dumb or naive enough to actually believe that. But what I found is I would go to churches and meet mature Christians that did not believe that way. And it was really confusing because I'm told to believe the Bible, but the Bible is saying things that people don't believe. And I went on this path of going to church after church after church, looking for the God of the Bible would probably be the best. And I was not beholden to any denomination. So I would go to these churches, and after a while, I would tell my wife, "Hey, I can't handle going here." And knowing what I know now is just because, the Spirit of God, the life of God was not in these churches. So I had this tough challenge of feeling guilty. And then my wife saying, looking at me as the husband and the leader of our family, and not putting us in a place where, we were going to church on a regular basis. So big challenge. I know a lot of other people experience that. Well, we moved down to Texas, and I had this really interesting life experience. I was talking to a guy who'd been raised as a Christian, and he became a Muslim, and he owned a restaurant, great food. I'd visit all the time. And we'd have these discussions about all kinds of things. And one time we were having a religious philosophical discussion. And I don't remember the exact topic, but he said the most fascinating thing to me that really caused me to think. And he said, "Brett, you're only talking about things you read, i.e., the Bible or Christian books, but you're not talking about things that you've experienced personally." And he was right. And it wasn't a jab. It was just a matter of fact, and it really caused me to ponder. And if I had to guess what was the catalyst for my journey to where I'm at now, I remember reading a book about a guy by the name of Letourneau, who was an inventor, and he built heavy equipment, and this was decades ago. And it was fascinating because he would get these ideas, and God would send him all over the world, and he would make a lot of money, and then he would donate the money to where he felt like God was leading him. And he was known as God's businessman. And I remember reading that, and I thought that would be so cool to get ideas and come up with ways of making money and then use it to where God would direct you. And I thought, I prayed about that. I said, God, I'd like to do that.
And
And
before
then
he
a
got
few
that,
years,
he had his Joseph calling. He had his Joseph steps. Uh,
and
and
and here's the crazy thing about that is that didn't even come into my recollection until just a little while ago. I really forgot about that. And as I was thinking about the past 28 years, I remembered praying that prayer. And so then in 1996, I'm driving down a highway in Texas, and I had this thought, and it's, you're going to have a global marketing organization involving many people using cutting edge technology. And at the time, I was not familiar with hearing God's voice. I thought it was a thought. It was very subtle, random, did not apply to where I was at in my life. And that was it. But it was distinct. Few years later, I'm up in Alaska. I moved up there to be close to my folks. My dad's health was declining, and a series of events led me to renting an office. And this was about this was 98. This was about when the time when everybody was trying to figure out the internet, if it was going to be viable for sales and marketing. And I spent 3 months like a business just surfing the internet. And I had 4 questions I was asking. And over the course of this time, I started putting these pieces together in my head. And all of a sudden, I had this epiphany, and I came up with this 4-part hybrid business model for doing what I called virtual sales at the time. Nowadays, it's called remote sales. And and then I started and I had to create a software system. I knew nothing about software. I spent 2 years very, very frustrated. Along the line, I started building a basic software system. When I say I meant I had people programming it for me. And Zig Ziglar had a company that I ended up being the top sales rep and sales team builder from Alaska. And that started catching people's attention because when I first started, people would say that won't work. You can't do that. And they ended up selling that company. And this was the highlight moment where everything shifted for me. This was the end of 2000. Somebody had anonymously sent me a book called God at Work by Rich Marshall. And it was basically about being a Christian in the marketplace, and, how you as a business person operate as a Christian and what that looks like. And I was one of those people that if you put a fish on your business card or your business, glass, outside of your building. I was always suspect that you were using that to be manipulative, and I was highly nervous, I would say, or just it was not my thing to be very public in my faith verbally. It was expressing it in actions, not talking about it. And all of a sudden, I'm reading this book, and a few things happened. Number one, I had like a 2, 3 week kind of Matrix like, if you've seen the movie, but it was just this download of thoughts, ideas, revelations. It was like a destiny moment. And one of the things that happened is God made it very clear that that was him that told me I was going to have this global marketing organization. The next thing is I ended up writing this 26-page letter that was the catalyst for launching this next phase of a software system and in this global sales network. It was Christian in principle, but not like what I'm being called to now. And shortly after I wrote this and started launching this next gen software, I was laying in bed, and this was the first time God ever spoke into my spirit. I was laying in bed Sunday morning. He said, "Go to church and get anointed with oil for business." Just like that. And it just blew me away.
Brett, let
Uh,
me
yeah,
interject something there.
yeah,
You were talking, I was brought to mind that in 2000, that was really about the year where the Holy Spirit began to speak to the marketplace as a whole. It was 2000. Rich Marshall and I released our books in the same month that year. TGIF came out as a book. Of course, I
right.
started writing it in 98. And it was around 98 that we started seeing early signs of God speaking to people and raising up leaders about the faith at work movement. So it doesn't surprise me that, that happened during that time.
Yeah. Well, I guess I that put me on the dartboard, and so um, that was a real life-changing moment. And the church we were going to at the time intermittently, the 2 previous weeks, they had called up people to pray for them, to anoint them with oil for healing. So I had a reference point for that. But I'm laying in bed. This happens. I'm literally scared not to do it, and I had not planned on going to church that morning. So I went without my family to church. At the end of the service, they were no longer doing this praying for people with oil, and I went up right after the service, and I just said to the pastor, I said, "God told me you're supposed to anoint me with the oil for business," and he looked at me like I was a little bit off, but they found somebody that prayed for me, and then shortly after that, everything I was working on took off. And one of the really interesting things is the year prior, I had had 3 people send me prophetic words about what was about to happen. 2 of them related to helping people, things happening fast, helping people make money, being very successful, and all this. But preface it with it being, God behind it, and there was a purpose behind it. And then there was a third one that was extremely um, serious and big, and I was told never to share it, and I haven't. But it always added a very somber element to what I was doing. And so then, long story real short, over the next 2.5 years, I literally became one of the top people in the world at what I was doing. I was a global leader. I ended up being a pioneer in remote sales. I ended up building sales teams in a number of projects in the thousands, because of the way I was doing was very unique. A couple in the tens of thousands. We had an affiliate network close to 30,000 people marketing our software, using it. I used the software for all my own projects. I licensed it out. I work with big companies. And so it was, and I had a number of other businesses that were interrelated, all to this. So I used to say it was violent because everything was happening so fast. I felt like I was getting fire hosed. Looking back now, it was just a really, really intense training time. And that was condensed into a really short period. So now here's where my Joseph pit experience came into gear. So I was in Hawaii over there for a business meeting, and I happened to meet this gal that we were chatting, waiting for a flight, and she had made a lot of money in real estate, and then she had become a Christian, and she found out she had a prophetic gifting. And as I mentioned earlier, she I'd had a couple people send me prophetic words, but I had no basis for this. I wasn't in a church that was teaching this. I wasn't studying it. I wasn't getting a bulletin or reading books about it. It was just completely out of my wheelhouse. And so when she explained that she had this gift, I was so naive. I said, well, okay, do mine. Like it was a palm reading or something. I mean, I was like just a complete idiot. And and she goes, well, it doesn't work that way. And I said, well, how does it work? And she says, well, I need to pray about it. I said, okay. So I gave her my contact information. And then a few months later, she called me up and she said, Brett, I have a word for you from the Lord. And as soon as she said that, I got hit in the spirit that whatever she said was from God. Like I knew ahead of time. So she ends up faxing me a page and a half document. And the main thing in it was that you're about to come into a time when you're going to be abased and don't fight it or it will take longer. But I have many things for you to do. Now, if you get something like that, the key word you're going to focus on is abased, right? And I literally went right to a dictionary, and I'm a word guy, and I wanted to look at all the possible meanings of abased, and it was not good. And I literally was like, I know this is true, and this sucks, you know. And about a month later, uh, I was at a big meeting. It was a sales project I was working on. I was literally making over $300,000 a month in commissions with this one project alone. And I was a featured speaker. I had been responsible, literally the driving force behind them going from under 200,000 a month to over 20 million a month in about 2.5 years. And what was really funny is when I first met the owner right before I started, and I told him what I was going to do and how I was going to do it, he said to me before I flew back to Alaska, he said, that'll never work, but good luck. So 2.5 years later, sales are over 20 million. I'm a featured speaker. And right before I get up, go on stage, I was in a hallway isolated. And it just hit me out of the blue that everything, not just that project, but everything that I was working on was not the thing that God was calling me to. And I knew it was preparation. I knew it was training, whatever, you want to call that, but I was not doing what he called me to do. And this was just to get me ready. And I was actually so depressed that it was physically noticeable. And in like 20 minutes before I was supposed to speak, the owner of the company came up to me and goes, Brett, what is wrong with you? I said, nothing, I'm okay. And so then a month later, and this is a very long story that I'm going to really compress. About a month later, the company got in trouble with the FDA and the FTC because they ignored a warning letter and didn't change the marketing material as far as making health claims about their nutritional product. And this is very common in the nutritional industry. You can't say what products do. And the owner thought he could play cat and mouse, and he had told us they were taking care of it, and he lied. And that's the very short version. And then because of the amount of money I was making, the company came in, and about a month after this meeting, they came in with guns, shut down the company, and they thought I was one of the owners. So I got put on the dartboard. My attorney ended up separating me out. I paid a massive fine, $500,000 cash, and they basically said, "We're not charging you with anything. You're not admitting guilt. Just don't do it again." It was, I'm not going to get into all my personal feelings about it, but it was basically based on the company owner not operating in an ethical way. But as at the time, it was really devastating. But it was the best thing that ever happened to me in my life. And the reason why is because that's when God really started showing up in my life in so many different ways. And I literally could write a book about it. And Oz and I were talking about that briefly. But here's where I met Oz. So I was scheduled to go to a meeting after this event happened, and I didn't want to go. And I had a bunch of friends that were going to meet me. You say, Brett, you got to go. You got to go. So I ended up going, and there was a friend of mine there that I met that I gave him a copy of God at Work. And so fast forward a bit later, I'm now living in Lake Tahoe, and he had read this book, and he had discovered Oz Hillman through reading this book in his daily devotional. And he had referred me to the daily devotional. I subscribed to it. And just for the record, I read that every day for 5 years. And 5 years. And if I didn't read it because I was busy or whatever, they piled up. They stayed in my inbox till I got back to them. And I cannot say how many times those were kind of like my lifeline for the day. Well, anyway, this friend that I gave the book to that referred me to Oz's devotionals, while I'm reading them, I go, I'm supposed to meet Oz, but I know I'm not supposed to do anything to make it happen. So a long story short, the guy I gave the book to ended up becoming Oz's business manager. He feels like he's supposed to introduce me to Oz. He does. And then Oz, I fly Oz out. We were living at Lake Tahoe at the time. And that's when Oz basically said to me, Brett, you're in an industry that's in a stronghold of greed and deceit, and God is basically training you up, raising you up to stand in the gap, to rise above this. And that was another one of those ugh moments. It was like, ugh. One of the things that I've learned is if you're listening to God and being obedient, you're probably going to get assignments that you don't want, you don't like. And that's just kind of the end of it. So then through meeting Oz, he invited me to a number of his conventions that he was doing at the time. The first one was in Minneapolis. Now I'm going to tell you some stories because they're very key to what I'm doing. But one of them was in Minneapolis. They had a gal speaking, Linda Rios-Brook, and she was a manager, 3 TV stations at the time, and they were secular. And she was an on-fire Christian, and she talked about how people gave her a hard time about that, being a Christian but managing secular stations. But it was about being a light in the marketplace, exactly what Rich Marshall talks about God at work. And one of the things that she spoke on was this idea that when you hear people talking about the wealth of the rich will be transferred to the righteous, that's a common thing in the marketplace. A lot of people act like it's going to be the lottery, right? You're going to all of a sudden have a big bag of gold on your front doorstep. And she said, no, 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 no. That's not how it's going to work. She said, who's going to have the wealth? She says, the world's going to have the wealth. And so it's by God giving you ideas or strategies and interfacing with the world that there's going to be a wealth transfer. And I knew right away when she said that that was correct. And you can look at an example of that in the scripture when Laban tricked Jacob to marry Leah and then stick around for another 7 years. And on the way out, he said, hey, I want you to take care of my sheep, breed them, and I'm going to get this portion and you get that portion. And God gave Jacob a strategy with the reeds so that the sheep that he was going to get, which was greatly more than what Laban intended because of the speckling of the sheep, and that was a supernatural wealth transfer. So that's a classic example of a wealth transfer from the righteous or the wicked to the righteous. So then a number of months later, I was invited to another seminar event conference down in Atlanta. And I was encouraged again by Joey. Joey did this the first time, he'd worked for us. And he said, go visit with this prophetic prayer team. And in this group had some things that they said to me that sounded like I was supposed to start something, but it wasn't clear. And you may be familiar with this name, Johnny Enlow. This was before he was famous. He was just a pastor and he had trained this prophetic prayer team. And I went to him, I said, Johnny, they said this, but I don't quite understand. He said, Brett, I'll pray about it. And I was visiting his church the next morning. And the next morning he
It was
goes,
a long day.
oops, let's see, somebody needs to mute themselves. So then I ended up going to this church, and in the middle of church, he just stops and he goes, Brett, I've got a word for you. It's time for you to go, go, go. You've been released. And I'm like, well, what does that mean? So I went home, flew back to Lake Tahoe, and the next thing I felt like I was supposed to do is go visit a friend of mine in Austin. And I did at the end. Nothing happened during the weekend. At the end, he gave me a book. And I read this book and I just could not stop reading it. It was called The Final Quest. Weird book, but it was something that grabbed me. And I flew home, and then I'm wondering what I'm supposed to do next. And the next thing I thought is I was supposed to visit another friend who was out in Florida at the time. And right before I left, I had this really weird sense that I was going someplace else. I wasn't sure what. And I looked up, okay, is it flying? Am I driving? Am I taking a train? And I even looked up where a train station was, to how close it was to the place where I was flying into. So I go to meet my friend. We're at dinner. I fly out, and we start talking about this book. the final quest. And he tells me, oh, Brett, yeah, I know that area. I used to live up there. I have a sister that's got a ministry up there. I knew who the author is. And as he's saying these things, I'm telling him, Joe, I'm supposed to go up there. And he just kind of laughs, and we talk a little more. No, no, Joe, I'm supposed to go up there right away. He just laughs a little bit more. And then he goes, I go, Joe, no, I'm supposed to go right away. I'm supposed to go by train. I know where the closest train station is. I need you to take me there tomorrow morning. And he goes, laughs again. And then he says to me, Brett, you're not going to believe this, but I've been telling my wife for years you were supposed to go up there, but I never said anything. So next morning he takes me on the train, takes me to the train. And on the way up, I'm getting the sense I'm supposed to move to this place, Moravian Falls, North Carolina. Many people are familiar with that. And so I get to Raleigh. That's as far as the train goes. Rent a car, get to Moravian Falls, and Joe had called ahead to 3 people. And the first person I met with, I'm telling him my story, more detailed up until this point. And at the end, I said, I get the sense I'm supposed to move here. And he looks at me and goes, Brett, you are supposed to move here. And what you're going to do is start like a wildfire and go around the globe. And when he said that to me, it just hit me in the spirit. And I knew right away he was right. And I had no idea what it was. I had a general idea, but not specifics. And so I ended up spending a total of 6.5 years in Moravian Falls, and I had some meetings, and there was a whole ton of stuff that I cover in some other things. But what I want to share with you is this is where things really started to happen. I was up my second time we lived in Moravian Falls. I was living on a mountain, and I got prompted to do a 3-day fast. And well, let me step back. So not long after this company that I was talking about got whacked by the FTC and FDA, I knew there was this Christian Global Network, and I did not know, I didn't have specifics. I just had the sense, but I was meeting with some Christians talking about it, and this one person kept pressing me for the name, and I didn't have a name. And finally I said, God, what is the name? And he told me, but this is how he told me. He said, it's the horn the Hebrews blew. And I was like, well, what's that? And so she said, well, so what's the name? And I said, it's the horn the Hebrews blew. And she goes, that's a shofar. And the reason I know that is a couple weeks ago, somebody came to our church that has a ministry on teaching about the shofar. And I said, well, that's the name, the Shofar Global Network. So a lot of stories happened in between, but the main shift was in 2009. I got prompted to do a 3-day fast. Towards the end of that, I got prompted to do a longer, to extend it to 10 days. And towards the end of that, 40 days. So I got tricked into a 40-day water only fast. And then not long after that, I had a sense I was just supposed to go into my office and start doing some research on some things. And I had no idea. This is the most longest term spirit led thing. This lasted for a month and a half. And every day I was led to go into the office and do some research and write. And sometimes it'd be 10, 12, 14 hours a day, like a job. Some days 4, 6 hours a day. There was a few times just an hour or two. And then a couple times I would go in there and I wouldn't get anything. But I was and every time I got finished with the section, I was led to write another section. And so this ended up, so when I started doing this, I ended up calling it the Shofar Global Manifesto. It ended up being over 130 pages. And it was 18 areas of mass deception going on in the world. Now, keep in mind, this was 2009. This document is more relevant today than back then. And when I was writing it, I was aware of a lot of the subjects I was writing on, but not to the deep extent of what I was getting. And each time I finished up a section, I was led to write another section. The main purpose of this document, a lot of times when people write about this, it's just like to freak people out. And it's just, but what God was showing me when I wrote this was that deception now is so all-encompassing on every facet of society that the only way you're going to really be able to operate and function is by hearing his voice and walking in truth. So this wasn't about rattling people's cage to just make them afraid. It was just to let them know that unless you're hearing his voice and being obedient and listening to him, you will not know truth. And when I finished up this document, I gave it to a friend to read. And when he got done reading it, he came to me and he said, "You did not write this." He said, the only way this was written is by through God." And I said, "You're 100% right." And keep in mind, it was after I did this 40-day fast. And there was a 13th section, and the 13th section was kind of like the game plan, what to do next. And it talked about all these things. From the two big words I kept getting over and over again over the previous years, and was emphasized in this, was self-sustaining communities and cities of refuge. Now, I want to just point out something right now. And there's a lot of facets to this. If God's been speaking to you about the word frequency and related to health or healing or soil or water, uh, spiritual warfare, protection, all kinds of aspects like that. He took me on all these different business adventures, and with all kinds of things related to frequency. So I just throw that out there. But one of the things that I got out of all this was that there was this was the Christian Global Network, and there was going to be resources, training, information, even business opportunities. But it was going to be truly spirit led, because there was a long-term purpose to what those were all going to be. So it wasn't like this money-making deal. It was literally because there's going to be some very turbulent times, whatever that means. I don't know fully. I'm not one of those guys that tries to freak people. I'm not a prepper. Like, for example, when Y2K2 came, I asked my wife, I go, "Do you feel like God's telling us to do anything?" And she said, "No." We didn't even buy an extra gallon of water. So we've always tried to be very sensitive to hearing his voice, and yet hear him writing about all these different things. And the two words that kept coming up to me over and over again was self-sustaining communities and cities of refuge. Now, I want to put a asterisk here. This is not to tell people to go out and stockpile stuff or freak out or buy gold or whatever. That may be where God's leading people to go. I feel like there's a component of what we're doing here. I have a friend that God gave him a framework for being more creative, more inventive, more innovative. That's going to be part of the Shofar Global Network. It's in addition to the membership, but it's going to teach people a framework of how you're naturally wired, meaning the way God designed you to be creative, to be inventive, to be innovative, to come up with really good ideas that then will be the source of businesses, projects, ministry, outreach. Um, who knows where those are going to go? But we have a mandate to show people this framework, and then wherever God leads them is where he's going to lead them. And this is also going to be something that we use for the different projects that we bring in through the Shofar Global Network. It's a huge part of what we're doing. And so it's about getting revelation based on how you are naturally wired, meaning the way God create you to operate in this high level capacity of hearing his voice and going where he leads you, and not having some, marching order to go out in the middle of nowhere and grow crops and, you know, go solar or whatever. So in 2009 is when I wrote that. Now, I went on this business project related to frequency, and this was happening over and over again. And I had to pull the plug on it because there were some red flags, i.e., fraud. And I saw the red flags ahead of time, but it was really strange because God had me stay in the pocket, so to speak, for about 3 weeks longer. And finally, he released me to pull the plug on it, and I did. And then I went outside, and I was quite frustrated because this had happened over and over again. And I started whining and complaining. I was like, why? Why do you keep having me get into these projects where they fall apart or have to pull the plug? Why? And he said to me right then, it was one of the few times where, I got an answer immediately, and he spoke into my spirit. And it was when I was whining. And he said, "I've been having you go into the enemy's camp to get the different pieces you'll need for the Shofar Global Network." And I instantly went, "Oh." And that didn't stop then, but he made it very clear what was going on. And that really helped me have a better understanding of why I would go in, I would get something, I'd recognize it, but I would recognize that there was things that were going off path, going into dark areas. that kind of thing. And so often this happens when people get into this, they go too far off the trail and then end up in the weeds. So I'll throw a
If I
side
could add
story.
one
Yeah,
thing to that,
yeah, you bet.
when you described that, it brought to mind Moses, where he spent, 40 years there in the palace, understanding the systems, being educated, learned, and so forth. And then he got isolated until the time where God said, now is the time. So as he went into that assignment, he had already been trained. He understood what he was up against. He had to deal with his own uh, self belief issues, and God had to deal with that. But that's what I thought about when you.
Oh, 100%. The same thing happened with Paul, right? You know, that's the one. I'll give you an example of that in just a minute. That's really profound. So another thing that happened when I was up in this house on the mountain, where I did the fast. Uh, a friend of mine did this. He called it Fulfillment Fest, and he did this a few years prior. And they had over 70 speakers from different parts of the country and around the world that came in and spoke on the Hebraic roots of Christianity. And it was amazing. There was like people got gold fillings, gold teeth. This was quite well known at the time this went out. I experienced some things like just beyond miraculous, supernatural. And I'm probably afterwards, I felt it was very important to preserve those audios. And so I asked the guy that put it on, Neil, if I could take them off the CDs. And I have all the audios of all the speakers and all the worship music that happened over this 21-day period. Well, he ended up taking this tent over to Israel, and they ended up doing like this 24-hour worship thing for a number of days right next to the Mount of Olives. And he had such favor with the government. It was just really, really amazing. But he ended up meeting a lot of people, and one of the people he referred to me was a Orthodox Jewish guy. And he'd moved from the States to the Israel, and he needed some help launching this marketing project that was related to a nonprofit advocacy group for Israel. And when we first talked, I wanted nothing to do with it. I could tell he was going to be a pain to work with. Wasn't up my alley. And I literally stalled on giving him an answer for 3 weeks. And God just kept pressing on me that I had to do it. So finally, I said, okay, I'll do it. I'll work on this for 90 days. I felt like I was okay to say that. And it turned out 90 days, everything that I could bring to the table got done in 90 days. It was amazing, the timing. And so now I finished up. That was it. Now it is the largest Jewish advocacy group in the world for Israel, with over 10 million followers, members, that stay on track of that. And there's if you have a heart for Israel or Jewish, or some things are coming down the pipe in the way of persecution, there's a big, God gave me the name Shofar. There's a lot of meaning behind a shofar, and there's a big part of what we'll be doing is connected to that. So then let's fast forward to modern day. So I pretty much after 2012, I uh, I left Moravian Falls, and I really had not given much thought to the Shofar Global Network. Up until that time, there was this pressure on me all the time about it was on me 24 hours a day about, and then all of a sudden, I got a break. And then about 8 years ago, God made me a nomad, and it was literally like we had to depend on Him for everything. Hearing His voice, where we're going to stay, where we're going to eat, if we're going to eat, when we're going to move. It was literally like following the cloud and the pillar of fire, and literally have been nomads. And then I had an office in northern Idaho for a while, and then in October, starting last year, I had a gal, she's almost 90 now. When I first met her in Moravian Falls, 2005, she immediately started giving me prophetic words, praying for me, giving me encouragement, all kinds of stuff. And I reconnected with her a few years ago, and then she started sending me stuff about some things are going to start to happen, pay attention, all these kinds of things. And I just started wondering. And not too long ago, this was probably around September, I had a dream. and I've had a lot of God dreams, but this one was really interesting because in the dream I had an iWatch on and it rang, and all of a sudden a good friend of mine, his name came up, and he was, back in Moravian Falls, and I looked and saw his name on the watch, and then in my spirit, God said, "It's time." It's like, what's that mean? So then a number of things happened, and this gal at the beginning of the year, this year, said, um, God had assigned her to be my intercessor for the year. And then she started just firing off all this stuff on a regular basis. And I'm like, I'm starting to wonder, what's going on. And then in April, she sent me a word that a prophet was going to call me and to wait for his call. And then in May, I get a call from a person that I know is prophetic. He's written books on angelic visitations, hearing God's voice. We talk, and then the next day he tells me it's time to start the Shofar Global Network. So this is in May, towards the end of the May. And then about 4 or 5 days later, this was about the end of um, June, right? No, end of May. Um, I wake up and I get the sense I'm supposed to go back to Moravian Falls, which was a very hard place to live. And I said, I hope I never have to go back there. Matter of fact, I said, I'm never going to go back there. And all of a sudden, I get the sense that I'm supposed to drive out there right away. And I call two friends. When I have stuff like that, I got to have somebody, you know, let me know that they're getting the same thing. And I called two friends. One of them said, "Hey, I felt like you were supposed to go out there." The other person said, "Yes, you're supposed to go out there." And these are mature believers. So I know that when they say they're getting those things. And I went to my wife. I said, "You're not gonna believe this. It's 6 a.m. in the morning. Like, we're supposed to drive out in Moravian Falls. Like, this is so off our radar." And I could tell within about 30 minutes, she was getting the same sense. We left at 3 p.m. And then during this time, I get the sense I'm supposed to be at the church, this church out there by Sunday morning at 10:15 a.m. So that's Boise, Idaho to Moravian Falls. That's 32 hours alone of drive time. So this meant we could not even stop to sleep. My wife and I just changed it up, and I'm supposed to be at this service 10:15 Sunday morning. I just know that. On the way out there, uh, a friend of mine, he's a pastor. He has two church campuses in South Illinois. He says, "Hey, Brett, you're going to be driving right by. Stop by, and I'll buy you dinner." So we stop by, and he says, "Hey, why don't you check out one of our churches?" And 20 years ago, I met him, and he said a number of times to me, "I feel like we're supposed to do something together." He said this previously, but I don't know what it is. So he gives me a tour of one of his churches, beautiful church. It's designed like a business conference center, not like a church. And he specifically did that. Seats 400 people. And he used to be connected to a network of churches that would broadcast Christian leadership training, a lot of it around business stuff. And he wasn't doing that. And he says to me, "Brett, you can have full access to my church to launch the Shofar Global Network." And one of the things that this gal had been interceding, for, praying for me, giving me words and all that, was that people are going to come, they're going to bring what you need, da 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 da. So I'm like, whoa. So then we get out to Moravian Falls 10 minutes before the church service starts. And as we're walking in, one of the key people, and he's connected to a very large intercessory network. We were friends when we were out there. He's literally walking up right as we're going inside. And he said, "Brett, I don't go to church here. God told me 15 minutes ago to come to church." And we reconnect. And now he's praying for us. He's got people praying for us. So then there's two other couples we haven't that are tied into this that don't go to church there normally, that are there, that we connect and chat with. So here's where it gets like really interesting. So there was some friends of ours that we stayed with for about 4 days. And I told the husband, Mark, I said, right the day before we left, I said, a lot of times, one of the biggest things that happens right before we leave. So the next day we're leaving, and we had visited the gal that had given us a lot of words and praise for us. She lives in that area. We'd gone to dinner with her the night before, and she'd spoken over one of my youngest daughter and said that she's going to have a gift for writing. So as we're leaving, Mark's husband, Elizabeth, is showing her how to do a journal, because she's done journaling for years. And this is a journal she did years ago. And we're like 15 minutes from leaving now. She opens up the journal, and this piece of paper falls out. And on top of the piece of paper is my name And on it is all these things that her husband Mark had written 15 years ago about the Shofar Global Network when we talked about it and where he felt like he should be involved. So we have a few more trips and we go all over. And one of the things that Margaret said is she said, you know, you're supposed to have those. I feel like we were supposed to go back up to Spokane and we had a storage place up there. And she said, you're supposed to get the shofars. Where, you know, where are they? And it just so happened the shofars were in storage. I actually have two now. And there's an interesting story about both of them. And I'll just tell you really quick. The first one was given to me several years before I even got the name by a native Eskimo who's a Christian, and he felt I was supposed to have it. And I didn't even, he just gave me this horn. He didn't even really know where it was, what it was. And I was like, why would you give me this? And it turns out there's an area that's not no longer connected called Tartaria, but it appears there may have been some of the lost tribes that went through Russia, ended up over in Alaska, that might have some connection. I don't know if that's true or not, but I looked that up recently because I started wondering, why would this guy give me the shofar? Well, the other one I got shortly after we got in Moravian Falls, a friend of mine had mentioned me to a friend of hers, and she had this shofar that she had been given by a well-known Messianic rabbi in Israel, and she felt like we were supposed to get it. And so when we went to visit her, and she gave it to us, I felt like my daughter, my 13-year-old daughter at the time was supposed to blow it. I gave it, and she blew it literally under the anointing, under the spirit, and she blew it, and it was perfect. It was sound, you know, the ups and downs. And if you've ever heard a shofar, it was, and she looked at me in absolute shock afterwards, and she goes, "Dad, that wasn't me." And this was one of the first times I got just totally hit in the spirit. If you ever heard of the Shakers or the Quakers, but this guy was praying for me, and I just got totally hit in the spirit in a very intense physical way. There's a lot of stories connected to that, but I want to bring it back to now. So then,
Brett,
as we were
Brett,
leaving, this was, yep, go ahead.
and I have not talked about this, but every Monday, Pamela blows a shofar after her prayer meeting with her intercessors.
Yeah,
She has
yeah,
two shofars in our kitchen, and
yeah.
every Monday around 7 o'clock, she blows them.
Well, it's really significant. It can represent the voice of God, the spirit of God, even in God itself. It's used for call to worship, call to assembly, call to war, call of warning, repentance. There's a lot of significance. And even I feel like there's some things, if it's done under the anointing, that there's a frequency that will come out that will deal with whatever God wants dealt with in the natural and the spirit realm. So it's a very, it's not just a horn of an animal. It's very significant. So so then this gal, Carla, who's been very instrumental in a lot of stories that I'm not telling here. I hadn't seen her in a number of years. She's in the Spokane area. I felt like I was supposed to meet with her. We spent 5 hours with her, and par for the course, nothing was hitting me of significance until the very end. And she mentioned this place in Idaho, and I'm not going to mention it specifically right now. That of it's kind of a retreat, convention center, Christian led place. And and she told me about it back in 2005 was when she was first went there. And when she spoke to me about it, I knew right away I was supposed to go. So she called ahead. We went down, and I had the fortune of meeting the owner and his wife and their chief operating officer, and they have people, Christian groups come in all over the time. And I told them very briefly, I just felt like I was supposed to come down there. And the amazing thing was he started building this back 30 years ago. And he used the word refuge, that God had told him to do this. And then he started sharing stories of all these people and connections and business people and investments and all these things that were being shored up for the kinds of things people like me have been called to do. And it was like an absolute divine connection. And so then so then that was just a little bit ago, and now I'm back in Boise, Idaho. So this Shofar Global Network, this is what I believe. I believe that there's people that in their spirit have already known they're being called to something global, something bigger, a network with real purpose. that is being led by God. It's not like some business deal. That's not to say there won't be money that will be generated, but anybody that's gone through this Joseph experience, right? This Joseph calling, one of the things that they learn in it is they don't own anything. They're a steward. If you look at, you can look at the story of Joseph, and yeah, he was second in command. Yes, he had all power underneath the Pharaoh, but at the bottom line, he was still a servant, right? And we have to recognize we're simply stewards, and that is a tough process to go through, where you recognize that you have gone through this process simply because God needs somebody that he can do what he needs to do through somebody that realizes it's not them and they don't own it. And so the Shofar Global Network, like I've prayed about every piece of this. Like there's a tagline or a unique selling proposition or a slogan. Um, and he specifically gave this to me over a couple of days. I kept, trying out words and that didn't fit. And it's shattering paradigms in the marketplace. Now there's a lot of meaning, but if you look up the word shattering, the definition, and if you look up paradigms and then you put those definitions together, it's extremely powerful. But this came about as a result of Oz. Oz spearheaded this when he said, you're in this industry, this involved with greed, deceit, and the other word I got was manipulation later. Greed, deceit, manipulation. And what's the opposite of greed? Generosity, right? What's the opposite of deceit? Truth. Now, I learned this other word from a good friend of mine. He passed away. We used to do these online discussions about the stuff he would write about scripture and the Hebraic roots of scripture and things that God was teaching him. But he said, if you look at this walk that you're following Yeshua, Jesus, if you're following him, the key attitude or lifestyle that you have to embrace is selflessness. Ooh. The prayer I was afraid to, and I readily admit this, for years to pray is not my will be done. Your will be done. Not my will be done, but your will be done. That is a scary prayer. Because if you really believe that prayer and you pray that prayer, and I've experienced that, your life's going to go in directions you maybe don't want to go, you don't like going, but you've literally made some kind of spiritual covenant to be led, to be a servant of the Most High God. So selflessness. So the opposite of greed, deceit, manipulation is generosity, truth, and selflessness. And so I've designed again, how long have we gone? Okay, so we're an hour. I want to keep this under an hour, so we're there. So good. So I designed this framework of what we're doing with the Shofar Global Network to really speak out the vision within these documents. We've set up a basic structure to launch. Just keep in mind, after, I hadn't given this any real thought since 2012. And all of a sudden, I get this wake up. It's time. And a matter of fact, well, never mind. So all of a sudden, like I'm supposed to put all these things together. I don't have my software company anymore. I don't have my staff anymore. I don't have anything. And all of a sudden I'm being led to put all these things together very, very rapidly, which I've done. And we have it at a basic level. And so really the start of this is just to share a really high vision, high level vision with a lot more like the Shofar Global Manifesto. It goes into 18 areas of mass deception going on. And a lot of the links in there are bad because I wrote it in 2009. But if you just don't even read any of the, click on any of the links and read it, you'll get it right away. And then there's four main documents. One is my story in more detail, little slower read. The next one is this manifesto that goes over these areas of deception. The next one is the game plan. Basically, it's the 13th section. It's an overview of the network. And then the fourth one is what memberships are available and that there's an affiliate program. And we have these founding member program, but it starts at just $100 for a year. Okay, that's it. And then we got levels of affiliates that want to make commissions. And then we have some founding member levels, a couple different ones. But I designed, when you look at this, you're going to go, this is really interesting. This is unique because I wanted the tagline shattering paradigms in the marketplace to be expressed in how I even structured the affiliate program. But there's this concept of better to give than receive, be a cheerful giver, first fruits, break the spirit of mammon. If you're familiar with Craig Hill's book, Living on the Third River, that's an extremely powerful book. And a lady was led to give that to me, and it really changed my idea of stewardship and giving and resources and managing the assets or resources that God gives you, and really understanding it's not yours. And then also, and then from a secular point of view, there's phrases we hear like pay it forward, law of reciprocity. Those are common phrases that are really biblical in basis. So I set this up to where uh, pretty much anybody can get involved at any level. And the whole idea behind what I set up was to grow this network as fast as possible, add some financial incentive to it, help people make some money. But the big thing are going to be the other things that we have go through it. And I want to make sure that everybody understands that I am very aware that I'm a gatekeeper of what goes through here. My job is not to be running businesses in this, which I've done in the past. My job is I'll give you an example. Shortly after that Fulfillment Fest, I think it was 2006, I was invited to go visit a friend, and he had a prophetic friend there, and they were praying for me. And at the end, he says, uh, "People are going to ask, where's Brett?" And they're going to say, he's in Japan, he's in Germany, he's in this country, he's in that country, he's here, he's there, he's everywhere. And I wondered for the longest time, well, what exactly does that mean? And I think I got it figured out. I think I'm going to be going to a lot of places globally very quickly. I'm going to be traveling all over the world with my wife and probably my youngest daughter, maybe my two youngest sons, and speaking and connecting with people. And then also, when I do that, that'll be broadcast globally through wherever venue. And so my biggest responsibility here is to be, for lack of a better word, the human shofar, to be sharing this. And there's a lot to it, and that's why I wrote down the documents that you can go through. But the other thing is to find people. I mean, people that are in their heart, they know right away that they're supposed to be part of this. Like, there's like, I remember when I got contacted about Zig Ziglar starting this company, I was getting ready to launch the first version of my software. I was like 1 or 2 weeks away from launching it. I've been totally focused on that for like a year. And a friend said, Brett, God's launching this company with Zig Ziglar. And I knew instantly I was supposed to do it. I went home and I told my wife, I'm supposed to do this. I didn't know anything about it, what they were selling, how I'd make money or anything. And I had to put the software project on hold. But the thing about it was, because I was listening in the spirit to do that, what happened over the course of the next year set the stage for when everything took off. If I had not done that, I would not have been in position for everything that took off, because many of those people, when they shut down the company, were Christians. And Zig had a huge Christian following. And so I had built up a reputation. People are going, who's this guy in Alaska? He's doing these crazy things. He's making things happen. And I've got this core group of people that work with me. They understood me. They knew what was going on. And then we went on to do a whole bunch of other things at a much broader scale. So, so I say this because I know people want to make money. People need to make money, and that's set up to do this. But at the same token, the driving thing is really what God is calling you to do, whether he's calling you to do this or something else. And then also understanding that what we're doing here goes way beyond, business and making money, because this is my firm belief. I believe what's going to happen with Shofar Global Network is going to set the stage in the way of training, resources, community, communications, projects, a lot of different stuff I put in the documents for down the road, whenever that is, when things start getting a little dark, little turbulent, little wonky, whatever it is. And I'm not an alarmist. I just have a sense of that. I know a lot of people understand. I think a lot of people read too much and try to describe exactly what it is. I think that goes beyond the mandate, at least for me. And I just know there's a big sense of creating this global network and connecting like-minded people. So with that, I can answer any questions, and then I'll tell people if they're interested what they can do.
Yeah, before we do that, as you were describing everything, a couple of things came to mind. One is that I and several others have been involved in Christian business networks, most of our Christian marketplace life. And I personally have been somewhat frustrated by the lack of impact we have had both in our cities and our nation and the world. Um, and partly, I think, is that we haven't had leaders of those organizations that had a skill set or perhaps the level of spirit led um, to be able to accomplish something. When I look at this and hear you without really knowing a lot of the nuts and bolts of it, what I sense is that God has prepared you for a long time for this and that He's given you the skill set to actually do the nuts and bolts of a project like this. But He's also taking you through the valley of the shadow in order to take the mammon spirit out of the equation. And He's had to do that with a lot of us. And so I hope those of you listening to this are picking up on that. And I know a lot of us transactional people, it's been like pulling teeth to sit through an hour of someone talking to us, just from the heart. But
Yeah.
almost everybody has stayed on the call. And
Yeah.
that tells me that the Spirit is working through what you're saying.
Yeah.
And so go ahead and give out what.
You said something there that I want to share with people because there was a year when we were up on that mountain in Moravian Falls, and this was felt like I think this was about a year, and I would literally go to my wife on a regular basis. I would say, I feel like somebody is carving out my insides with a dull, rusty spoon, meaning dying to self, dying, and like it was literally a physical thing, and I will be absolutely. My wife will second this. So when we talk about fighting the will, don't fight this or it will take longer. That's a big thing. And it took me I'm like, what am I fighting? What am I fighting? What am I fighting? And I finally realized what I was fighting. I was fighting my will. I was fighting my will. And see, that's not a mental thing. It says in the Bible, Jesus learned obedience by the things he suffered. And I don't think that was just when he was crucified. I think he constantly was challenged over this selflessness concept of, am I going to do what the Father is having me do or speak, or am I going to do what I would like naturally want to do? And I was a strong-willed kid right out of the gate. I was a handful. My mother had a handful. And so, why would God pick somebody that's just a handful? Super strong will, AAA driver, all kinds of things in that regard to do something like this. The only thing that makes sense is once he turns your heart, once he breaks your will. I was listening to a program with Dobson, right? Dr. Dobson, right? Remember him? He'd talk about child psychologists and Christianity. And I didn't listen to him at all. But one time when I was flipping the station on when we were in Texas, James Dobson said, he's talking about raising kids, and he says the primary objective for raising a kid is to break their will, but not their spirit. And if you don't do that when they're children, when they grow up later and God has to do it, it's going to be a lot harder and a lot rougher, right? And so my will had to be broken later on in life. And it was extremely strong will. And this is not something you can do by memorizing Bible verses. This is not something you can do on your own. This is not something you can do mentally or whatever. It's a process. And boy, it sucks. And I mean, like, there is no way I could ever look somebody in the face and like say there's any I it when they talk about it will cost you everything, like the rich young ruler. I had a supernatural download of that whole thing where I got extra details on it, revelatory details shortly after I moved to Moravian Falls. And I didn't realize at the time God was making it very clear what he was having me go through. But when he was telling when he came when the rich young ruler came to Jesus and he said, what else do I have to do? I've done all these right things. I'm a good guy. I should be on the A list. What do I have to do? And Yeshua knew his heart. He knew. So superficially, operationally, actionable items, this guy was checking off the list. But what was not there was that there was things above that in his life that were basically idolatry, which is his wealth, right? Which with what he owned, which is really easy to do. I don't care if it's your job, your business, your money, your status, your power, your family, your wife, your kids. It's so easy to slot all those above God. It truly is. And and I think this whole process, and everybody has a choice. I think it's not just me. I think everybody has a choice every time they come to this crossroad to make that decision. If somebody said to me, "Why are you here?" I'm not 100% sure. Maybe it was because of that prayer. Maybe because every time I knew God was speaking to me, I chose to make that decision, even if it was really hard or I looked like it was an idiot or whatever. And then the other thing, and I think this goes back to what I was getting to, and I'll finish up with that, was that strong will actually can come in handy when God's walking you through this process. And just like you won't give up in the natural, you don't want to give up in the spiritual process because, remember when the disciples, Jesus had some pretty hard teachings that people weren't able to understand. And all these people walked away. And then he looked at his disciples and he said, "How about you guys? Are you going to hit the road?" And they go, "Nope. Where are we going to go? You have the words of life." And when you have enough of those experiences like they did, and like I've had, just blessed to have, because there's no way I would have stuck on if I hadn't had those experiences. You get to the point where you know that you can't go anywhere else. This is it, right? And so you talked about, you've talked to other leaders and they did this business networks. I want to comment on that because I have really, really struggled for the longest time about, why this wasn't happening, why I was going through all this stuff. And the only thing that really made sense to me was there was a lot of other moving parts with a lot of other people that were all interconnected, but that God was working on them all individually, and that there would become a time when they would start being connected. And I believe that's the significance of the shofar, because that's a big part of it. Just physically, and then if you ever listen to the sound of it, there's something to that that resonates in your spirit if you're being led by the Spirit. And so, when you read the stuff I've written, I'm very clear. All the stuff that I'm talking about, I didn't even write my story. God did, by what he took me through. Everything about what I'm writing is what he took me through, not something that I did. It was what he took me through that, stuff may have happened. And I know there's countless other people that have had those experiences. And if I said my job is to just start sounding the shofar, so to speak, and those people will be activated for whatever their part is. It talks about the body of Christ. Somebody's a finger, somebody's a thumb, or the dishes, the pot, the bowl, the cup. We
So,
all have our part.
what would you like our listeners to do to learn more?
Well, okay. So I made this super easy because a lot of times I'll say, well, do this, go that. Just remember this. And Oz, all he's going to do is send out this email, even if you forget it. But just remember TGIF, that's Oz's devotional, at shofarglobalnetwork.com. And just say, hey, I listened to you with Oz and I'd like some more information, and then I'll shoot you some more information. And then if you want to sign up as a member, or all the information's there. Like I spent a lot of time writing this all up, and then you can just go through it. And then I have a link if you want to meet and talk with me personally, you can do that too.
That's TGIF at shofarglobalnetwork.com.
Yeah, and if I have access to, which I
I
should,
just put it in the chat.
yeah, okay, I'll just double check and make sure the um the spelling's good. As long as the spelling's good, it's cool. Chat. Let's see. TGIF, Shofar Global Network. Yeah, you can spell. Awesome. So I can answer. I'm more than happy to answer any questions.
Okay, we've got Ron Hart that wants to ask a question. So, Ron,
I know Ron Hart, and I'm just telling everybody I didn't bait him with answering a question. So I just want to clarify there. So he's not asking a pre given question. It's not
Oh,
like a
yeah.
show.
Well, it's just a privilege to hear the story again, Brett, because I know Brett from Zig Ziglar. I've done things with Brett, and I'm here to encourage people. And I've sent this to Brett. It's an excerpt out of a blog from Brian Simmons, and it says, "My favorite saying is attributed to Ross Perot." How about that? I pick the jockey and let the jockey pick the horse and ride them. When I invest in the God's kingdom, I look for the right jockey in which to invest. I don't invest in what they do, but what they are and who they are becoming in the kingdom of God. So I just give that testimony that Brett, I've seen him put his forehead up against. So I remember when he moved to Moravian Falls, and he came around the corner, and there's a big yellow sign that says dead end, and Michelle says, "Not again." So I just say, when I joined Zig Ziglar, I had that same feeling. I don't know what this is, but I'm doing it. And I'm the same way here. And I just encourage people to send you that email, find out more, and go from there. So thanks, Brett.
Okay, so thank you, Ron. I appreciate that. I just see a question here. Phil's asking, what is the vision of the Shofar Global Network in a few years if everything was working as you envisioned? Okay, so first of all, I'm not. I just got to say this over and over again. I know what it's like to, in the natural, have a business project and you envision what your goals are and what you're trying to accomplish. Okay, I've been there. I get that. I also know when God turns off the light bulb and you can't even get out of the chair, right? So I've been in like not able to do anything. And I used to, Jesus said, you cannot do anything outside of him. If you are not in the branch, and I used to say, how can you not do anything? I don't get that. I mean, I really wrestled this for a number of years. And then I started realizing what that meant when he pulled the plug on me and I was not allowed and incapable to do anything that I wanted to do. See, that's the difference. I want to do versus what he's going to do through me. And until you've gone through that process, I don't know if you can even fully comprehend what that means. And I'm not trying to be condescending because I sure couldn't. I did not get it. I mean, I was like, what does this mean? What do you mean I can't do something? I can do something. And so when Phil asked that, yeah, your wife is a saint. Yeah, ain't that the truth? My wife is double saint. She's gonna get like a plaque, I think, in the Hall of Saints. So this vision, I have to operate real time. And I used to be a guy, okay, I think this through, I plan it out, I do that, right? So, Jesus said, don't worry about tomorrow because today has enough evil or enough problems or enough issues, right? And you don't even know if you're going to be alive tomorrow, going around saying, well, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. Well, I used to be that way all the time. And I have to watch myself even now because I'll think I know. And then sometimes like it's a 90-degree turn. So this is the general sense I get. The general sense I get is this global network, like-minded people, spirit-led believers. They're going to have this framework for literally being co-creators with God. That's a big part of this because what my real emphasis is not for people to listen to me. I want people to listen to God and go where he's leading them, whatever that is, right? And so if I can be a catalyst for what's happened to me, that would be number one. Now, what that looks like individually and what it looks like collectively is really going to be where this goes. But I believe there's going to be a global network of self-sustaining cities of refuge. What that actually means, I do not want to put a prepper label on that. I think that's the wrong thing. I think a lot of people, they see what's going on and they physically and mentally are trying to do something that God's not really telling them to do. That doesn't mean they shouldn't do it if they're being led to do it, but do it because God's leading you to it, not because you've gotten on a radio station or a TV program where they talk about every day it's the end of the world and you got to go hide everything, right? Because that's not really scriptural. There is some verses about being a steward and saving up and doing that, but then there's also scriptures about trusting God completely. So both of those things applicable in the right situation if that's what he's telling you to do. Another thing is I believe there's going to be a lot of technology, especially around food, water, growing things, healing, hearing God's voice related to frequency. That I had so many different things happen. And what was really crazy about this is I would see that there was pieces that were of God. And then I would, as I would go down this path, I would also see things that were might be you could call new age or occultic, but there was mixture, right? And that mixture is where you get in trouble because if you're not doing exactly what God's leading you to, and there's mixture included that's where things fall apart. That's where you're operating out of the spirit. That's where things go nowhere. And the gal I was telling you about earlier, um, she sent me an email just a few weeks ago, and she's really good about sending me things without us even talking. She even doesn't like me telling her much that confirm what I'm already getting. She said, Brett, you don't need more information because I'm kind of an info junkie, if you can't tell. You need more revelation. And what she's saying there is, I have to be very sensitive in the spirit what God is telling me to do because there's so many people that are going to be listening to what I say. And number one, I got to make sure that I'm the catalyst for them listening to Yahweh, right? And so everything I say should be something that is resonating in their spirit because of what God's telling them or leading them to do. That's like the biggest part of this, to be quite frank. And I take that role very, very seriously because we've all been in situations where it's in church or business or ministry or stuff where people start talking out of their own self-interest, right? And I've had that experience and it always ends up in a dead end or a flat pancake, right? And so that's a huge part. And so a big part of what I do is I have people that I know I can talk to and I like, okay, are you getting this? Like I have to make sure I'm making good decisions, the right decisions, the one God's leading me. So that's a big part of this. The other part I think is we're digital right now. This could be going anywhere in the world right now. Is you got to have local connectivity. You got to have people that you're connected with, home church, body, people. You got to have that. If you and I've been isolated to where we have nobody around us, and that was for a season. But I was still able to connect with people by the phone or Zoom or something, right? And those are okay. But having that local connectivity of like-minded believers is imperative. And so even like when you talk about city of refuge or self-sustaining communities, that's not just physical, that's spiritual. That those are the things that are going to feed your spirit, keep you where you're supposed to be in your place in the kingdom. And that's a major, major saying, okay, so if somebody says, is the manifesto for sale? No, I can't sell that. It's for free. And so when you email me, I was talking to Oz earlier about writing a book, and I know as soon as I write it, I'm going to put it on Kindle for free and send it out for free. The abridged version of my journey is not very long; it's about 20 pages, but that is the kind of the outline of my book, and I'm just supposed to send it out. So, what else can I answer?
Heather has a question.
Oh, wait. Okay, let me finish. Gary said your wife's a saint. How have you walked through this together and thought she was crazy? She thought I was crazy. That's a really good question because
I
you know,
answered that for him.
yeah, two people, you get married, two shall become one, right? And I started getting things way before my wife did, as far as like I would get it, and she really fought me for a while. And then when we went out to Marine Falls, there was a pastor. So I got filled with the Spirit at 20, right after I got saved, like a week or two later. So here it is in 2005. My wife's 5 years younger. I'm 61. Do the math. So we're out there in this he's an evangelist. He was going around, he's just praying for people, and he just touched her forehead and she started praying in the spirit. It was right after that that she really started getting stuff. Now, here's the problem, and this is an ongoing problem. I'll be the first to admit it. Sometimes I get stuff. Most of the time I get stuff first. Sometimes my wife gets stuff and then she doesn't tell me. And then I'm like, why didn't you tell me this? And she only tells me after the fact. Sometimes she doesn't get anything and I have to make hard decisions that she doesn't necessarily like. I got a pretty good batting average on that because I'm truly making them out of lean. That doesn't mean I get them right all the time, you know. And a lot of times I'm wrestling, and a lot of these are minor things, but I'm wrestling like, okay, timing thing, do this, do that. And so here's what I would say. The constant challenge there is that we're both doing our best to hear God's voice. And if we're doing that, that reduces the friction and the disagreement that we have. And that's the challenge that we all have. And there was a guy, I can't remember his name, but he's dead now, but he taught on the battle is in the abiding. And if you're familiar with this, he's very famous evangelist, pastor, or preacher kind of guy, teacher, honestly, Neville Johnson, I think it was, out of Australia, maybe. But he said the battle's in the abiding. Now, what does that mean? It basically means the toughest part of this journey is staying in his spirit continually and walking in that. And that's what you have. That's the challenge for both of you as a couple. What else can I?
Heather has a question. Go ahead, Heather.
Oh, yes, thank you. Not so much a question, just a comment. What you're saying about the strong-willed person. Yes, I'm very, very, very strong-willed.
Yeah.
He's definitely breaking me now as we speak.
Yeah.
Yeah, that just hit me because I'm being broken now as we speak. But yeah, it's
Well,
good.
I know that sucks, so I feel for you.
Yes,
Yes.
it does. Very
Yeah.
much. Yes.
But
Yeah.
just for the record, when I was telling Oz my story, and that was the first part of when God was really taking me through that, he laughed at me. And and in his book, he said, Gunnar, who wrote the book Business Unlimited, that Oz is giving away free. It's a fantastic book on the spiritual journey. But that Gunnar kind of laughed at Oz. So it's like, I won't laugh at you because it's hard.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. Yes, it is hard. Yes, it is hard. So yeah, I'm going through the preparation phase. But yeah, it is rough. But I do feel like I'm being prepared for something. But yeah,
Yeah.
it's rough going through
So,
it.
okay, did you just want to say that? Because I can maybe give you something that might just help you or encourage you.
To tell you why or what or
No, well, I mean, was there anything else you wanted to share?
oh no.
Okay. So let me, because I know there's a lot of other people that are either going through this or aware of this and whatever. Okay. There's a few little lessons that we've learned along the way. They're kind of our in-house rules. So number one is when things get really dark, you don't know what's going on, you're discouraged, you're feeling like you're just a loser or whatever, all the bad emotions, right, that go and thoughts that go through your head. I have what are called anchor points. So whatever it was that God told you last, whether it was a Bible verse or he spoke to you or a prophetic word or a word of knowledge or a life event, it's like David. My favorite book is Psalms. And if you look at Psalms, when all these times that David was going through that were hard times, what did he do? He went back to his anchor points of what God did for him or what God did for Israel. And he reminds himself by speaking them out or writing them out, and then also by speaking them back to God. So anytime that you're just in that total pit, go back to your anchor point, right? So this was I think I'm not good on times because I get lost in the now. So I always have to ask my wife, like, when did this happen? But I'm going to tell you this word that he gave her. And it's very important that anything I tell you that's a word we gave us, that's what he gave us. Like I'm very leery of when people give prophetic words and they make them for the general assembly. That may not apply to you. So don't grab on things that aren't for you. I'm just saying in general. But he gave us this word because he knew this was probably about 2 years. He knew we were about to come into a time that was going to be really, really hard. And this is what he told her. She was fasting and he told her, I will provide a way when there's no other way. Now, maybe that would be something that if you ask God, he would like, maybe that would be for you too. But I cannot tell you the amount of miracles that we've had in the way of provision, direction, supernatural stuff happen over the last couple of years. And it was always based on, I will provide a way when there's no other way. Now, when we first got that word, we didn't really get what that meant. And then after a few months, we realized what he was doing was preparing us ahead of time for the fact that we would be totally dependent on him because there would be no other way around it. Does that make sense? Like, yeah. And And this is, I think, the most important part of this abasement journey or breaking our will is we cannot truly experience the power and provision of God until we're absolutely helpless. And so he takes our kickstand and knocks it out. And that's why he says you'll go through trials and tribulations. Now, the experience is tough. It rots. It sucks. I will never, ever, I could never look anybody in a straight face and say, yeah, right, that was cool. But I will tell you, the back end of that is the revelation that what God did for you, even though you hated it and didn't fully understand it, was the best possible thing that could ever happen to you in your life. And the only
Yeah.
way to get through that is
Mhm.
by obedience to whatever he told you to do next. And if you don't do it, he'll probably run you around the mountain a few times, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I know there's some mountains I probably ground a path around. I just didn't know it at the time that that's what I was doing. So anyway, hope that
Brett,
encourages.
I think
Yes,
it's
yes,
time to
definitely.
close out. I am posting something in the chat area, based on your comments there. There's a couple of resources you guys can download at adversityfaq.com, both my book on Upside and also the Q&A that
Yeah.
we had last week in our webinar. But I think you got the gist of it, and now we're going to take a deep dive with Brett sending us some information. And
Yeah.
so feel free
So
to.
you can email me, and then I'm also going to give Oz some stuff that he can send out, to everybody that registered, because there'll be a bunch of people that didn't see this. And then also starting next week, I'll be doing at least a once a week Zoom, and then also in my information will be a link that if you want to schedule a Zoom meeting one-on-one with me and talk about anything, you can do that too.
All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and pray for us as we close out. Father, we thank you for the vision that you've put in Brett's heart, and we just pray that you would breathe upon it now and just keep us all on the straight and narrow with you, Holy Spirit, that we don't go ahead or behind, that we follow you under the cloud. And we just breathe upon this, pray, ask that you would breathe upon it, and that we could just be faithful. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
All
Well,
right.
I just want to thank everybody for listening. I know that was a long monologue, and thank you, Oz, for everything you've done in my life. I appreciate it.
Take care.
All right.
Bye.
Okay, bye-bye.